Hello everyone! Today I will be featuring the Irian, a ship I was honestly planning on making a commentary a week ago, but somehow it kinda got forgotten, it slipped to the back of my mind, and that's probably because this ship isn't really that memorable. If you think it looks very much like Kutuzov, well, that's because it's practically a copy-pasted Kutuzov. In fact, if you were to look at the left side of the ship, you can even see the Cyrillic lettering writing out Mikhail Kutuzov on the side of the ship. That's how much of a copy-paste it is. The camo, everything is identical to what you might see on the Kutuzov, which is of course the Tier 8 Soviet premium that is infamous for its ability to smoke up and then farm ships with HE from within that smoke. Now, the Irian is another attempt at a Tier 8 light cruiser premium. This one is Pan-Asian though, so this one isn't Soviet, but it's actually Pan-Asian, and it does have a bit of a different flavor going on. Most importantly, the flavor that I am demonstrating right here, and that is torpedoes. Not only, as you might see, are these torpedoes deepwater torps, but you also are able to slot a torpedo reload booster on a cruiser, which is, to say the least, very strange. To add to this, these torps are actually very fast and very hard hitting because they are practically pre-nerf Yueyang torpedoes. You can launch 5 per side. They are deep water, they deal 17.9k damage each, they have a range of 13.5 kilometers, and they have a speed of 68 knots. So, strong torpedoes. And if you do get the opportunities to actually use them, like this example here, they can be quite useful. They can give you a nice additional chunk of damage, they can open up possibilities of forcing damage con, or in this case this guy doesn't even have a damage con, so I can just start setting fires on him now because I know he's already flooding. It synergizes somewhat decently with your ship. I say somewhat decently because, well, if you're talking about trade-offs, trading off a smoke, basically safety for a cruiser, for potentially maybe landing torpedoes on someone, then obviously, well, the trade-off is terrible. Because guns are consistent damage, torpedoes are highly inconsistent, very random damage, and this guy actually survives. I can't believe it. I had AP loaded, I thought it was going to accelerate, but he's moving so slow, so it looks like I'm actually not even going to be able to get that kill myself. Still though, I'm a bit annoyed by it, ignore my spastic whizzing about with my mouse, but there are opportunities where this gimmick, so to say, can be useful, but it has so many downsides. It has so many downsides. First of all, if there's a carrier in the game, then it's very hard to get into positions where you can use the torps. Most of the time, you're forced to launch these torps from the front of the enemy fleet, which means that they are already pushing nose in. And the worst part is, because you're only launching 5 of them with torpedo reload booster, potentially 10, the spread isn't nearly narrow enough either. The spread is actually very wide, and that's when using the so-called narrow spread, but I think the narrow spread is far too wide. And so you often end up with these absolutely gigantic gaps in your torpedoes. Like, we're talking 3 Kurfürsts side by side could fit between the same gap. That's how large the gaps become when you try to torp something going nose in. So there's very little consistency in actually landing. It's already hard enough to land torpedoes consistently because they are such a very random tool to use, but with the widespread that you get going on with these torpedoes, it's even more difficult. And the value I've been able to get out of the torpedoes has been very spotty, to say the least. It's been hard to put that gimmick into use. As in comparison, if we compare it to the Kutuzov, using Kutuzov smoke is very easy. You park somewhere, you see enemies in front of you, you smoke up, and then you sit in your smoke and you just farm the enemy team. It's very easy to put that gimmick, to put that like extra tool. It's very easy to use it, it's very easy to get a lot of value out of it. In comparison, getting value out of these torpedoes is very difficult. Or if we go to the non-premium equivalent, the Chapayev, it's also pretty damn easy to get value out of the radar, considering the Chapayev you can literally push up until you get spotted, and then when you get spotted you can just pop your radar because you're capable of stealth radaring in that ship. Or you just sit near caps, you wait until it starts getting contested, and then you pop radar and you'll be radaring ignoring the enemy DDs. Once again, it's much easier to get solid value, solid like just response out of both radar and smoke. These are tools you can rely on. These are tools that are consistent. You know how they're going to behave. You know what they're going to give. But I mean, look at this. Look at the gaps on these torps, for example. You see that massive gap between the number 1 and 2 torpedo? Like that Roma could probably fit broadside between those gaps. So the torps are very hard to land and very RNG. Very, very RNG. So the value you get out of them is very spotty. Now, comparing this, I mean, obviously I'm going to compare it to the Kutuzov. They have pretty much the same dispersion. The difference is that the Kutuzov actually has a 19.1 kilometer range, whereas the Irian only has a 17.5 kilometer range. The Irian is also slower than the Kutuzov at 32.7 compared to Kutuzov's 33. It has a worse rudder shift. It has a 10.3 compared to, I think, Kutuzov's amazing. Was it really 6.5? I'm not sure. It appears so. Now, it does have better concealment, though. It does have better base concealment. It has a 13.7 base, which means with full stealth build, as you can see me running here, you can reach a 10.5 km concealment. And somewhat amusingly, of course, because smoke firing penalty is calculated based on your base concealment and your gun caliber size. So somewhat amusingly, the Irian actually has a better smoke firing penalty at 7 kilometers compared to Kutuzov's 7.7. But considering you don't really have a smoke, you can't really get any value out of that. The reload and overall DPM is pretty much the same, but of course Kutuzov's is much easier to put to use because, well, smoke, for obvious reasons. It is worth mentioning that while the AA is the same, you actually can't slot defensive AA on the Irian, which is a pretty damn big weakness considering Kutuzov's AA is pretty damn good. And on the Kutuzov, that's why defensive AA Kutuzov is kind of the bane of carriers. It's a very nasty ship to deal with because that long-range AA tends to shred planes. But on the Irian, you can only slot hydro and torpedo reload booster. There are no other options. So you're kind of pigeonholed into running this one specific setup and just trying to play around it as best as you can. Is the ship fun? I mean, I've often mentioned that the Kutuzov, it would be a good ship even without the smoke. Simply because you have so much firepower. IFHE is, in my opinion, a bit of a broken skill because it literally means that light cruisers, they have so much damage because, well, they penetrate everything, even things that they shouldn't penetrate. So on a ship like the Kutuzov, IFHE, of course, means the DPM is insane, which is on the Irian as well. Well, you could see the volleys on that battleship. I was doing like 6k raw damage. That's without adding any fires into the game. So the HE raw damage is good, and the ship itself, just like the Kutuzov, you can do just fine without the smoke. You don't need a smoke to be successful. This Atlanta makes a massive mistake. He instantly damage cons of fire. If I get a fire on him now, he will die. That's why it's a mistake. You shouldn't take risks like that. He could damage con now that he's getting behind the island. Now is the time when he should be damage conning, but he actually gets very fortunate and he doesn't get set on fire, so he does survive it. But in general, if you're in situations like that, if you're about to get into cover, wait until you're there before you pop that damage con, because you risk being set on permanent fire. Eating a few extra ticks of fire as you're getting into cover is worth it compared to risking burning to death while you're in cover. So especially in cruiser versus cruiser duels, I've noticed that other cruisers tend to be very, very itchy on the trigger finger when it comes to blowing that damage con, and that's something you should avoid. Another issue, of course, with these torps is that, well, it's very hard to get value out of both torpedo launchers on both sides. The torpedo angles are decent. I mean, I wouldn't call them good by any means because you have to expose a lot of broadside to use these torps. And you gotta remember this ship is very, very squishy. I got a bunch of torps heading out for the Normandy already, so I'm just gonna try to focus down this Roma. And you gotta remember that you have the Kutuzov armor. I think you actually have slightly worse armor. The Kutuzov has a somewhat unique armor of 26 millimeters, and I think you have 25 on the Irian, but it doesn't actually make any difference because both values get overmatched by 380 millimeter guns, which is what the Roma has. And I'm trying so greedily to kill him because we're down so much, and I'm trying to secure this kill. kills. My torps finish off the Normandy. He keeps going in a straight line. Once again, that's probably something that will maybe change when people learn that what kind of torps this ship has, because right now you get away with a lot of torpedo issues that you normally wouldn't. The Roma overmatches my stern actually and gets an 8k volley, and I couldn't get a fire or any finishing damage on him, so I couldn't really secure the kill. But that's one of the situations where I have been able to get value out of these torpedoes. But it's hard. It's generally very hard to get value out of them. That game showcased one situation, and that's when you know the enemy is you're behind an island, you know the enemy is pushing around the corner, and you can preemptively torp. That's when you tend to get some value. The other situation that I found I managed to get some value out of is honestly when my team is losing hard, which is sad, but it's been a consistent source of torpedo value for me on the Irian. If my team loses hard and the enemy team starts pushing in like crazy, and especially if they see me and they start chasing me, that's when I've been managing to get a lot of torpedo hits in, because, well, they don't really care too much. They just go ham and they try to secure the kills because they know the game is already over. When it comes to actual offensive gameplay, like playing aggressive, getting value out of these torps is so very hard. You got a large citadel, you got squishy armor. In order to use the torpedoes when you're pushing in, you have to expose a ton of broadside. You tend to just get blapped if you try to use it aggressively. Another issue is, of course, that, well, concealment 10.5, it's great for a cruiser. But considering your gimmick is torps, you kinda often try to play it a bit more as a torpedo boat, and a 10.5 kilometer torpedo boat really just doesn't work. You try to push a flank to get some interesting torpedo angles, and you get randomly spotted by a plane or a destroyer or whatever, and then you have to run for your life, and you don't really have any ways of surviving besides just fleeing and praying, so going for the torpedo flanks is usually too risky. So maybe I had hoped that the torpedoes would be a more integral part of the gameplay, integral part of the ship itself, but ultimately it's kind of just it's a small support gimmick, a small support extra. You might get value out of it every now and then, but in a nutshell, this ship is really just a Kutuzov without a smoke. And you gotta remember, the Kutuzov also has 8 km torpedoes, and those torps can actually hit destroyers as well. Yes, they are not as potent as these ones are, but the gameplay-wise has been quite a disappointment. And if I had to compare it to the Chapayev or to the Kutuzov, I would much rather play the Chapayev or the Kutuzov. That's really what it comes down to. When it comes to my impact on the outcome of the game, I am much more confident in the outcome, in the impact I can have in the Chapayev than the Kutuzov, than what I can have in the Irian. Because yes, the torps can be fun when you land some hits, especially if you get those floodings, and then with your fire chance and your DPM you can follow it up, but the actual impact on the gameplay, well, like this game is a perfect example. My team has lost all the caps, my team has lost everything, and the enemy team is basically just charging in like madmen, and it's because that they're charging in like madmen that I'm getting a lot of value out of these torps. Because, well, all torpedo boats deal better with kiting away, all HE spammers deal better with kiting away, so these are like the optimal situations. If you're the guy chasing, if you're the guy pushing, well then obviously your torps are pretty much zero value. Trying to hit this Monarch. I landed a torpedo on something and I got a flooding earlier, so I'm predicting it's probably this Monarch down here. And we do get a fire on him, and we do get some of that raw damage. I mentioned IFHE plus these guns plus squishy battleships means a lot of raw damage. He does get undetected, but I did get a fire on him. Looks like he damage conned the fire as well. He still shoots though, which is obviously a mistake. And we can follow it up with even more HE. But once again, enemy has 920 points. All I'm doing at this point is delaying the inevitable and farming damage that doesn't really have any impact on the outcome. My torpedo tubes broke, which happens at times as well. And, well, that's of course an advantage of the radar and the smoke. Those things can't break. So, on the other hand, they can run out if you use them enough. Still though, the Irian is... but I mean, that sounds awful in the sense that I say it's and that makes it sound like it's a bad ship. It's not a bad ship, because it's a Kutuzov without a smoke, which I've already said can be absolutely a strong ship, because it's got the DPM and it's got a good concealment and all this. But let's say the gimmick is because it doesn't really add any value. And this is the kind of ship that you might consider if you don't already own the Kutuzov. If you own the Kutuzov, I see very little point in playing this. This ship might become significantly more interesting if they tighten up the torpedo spreads, or maybe give it some improved torpedo angles, so you got more offensive value out of them, because pushing in and trying to use them, as I mentioned, is garbage. Torping ships at long range is garbage, because the gaps become so gigantic. So either one of those, or maybe even both of those, to actually make this thing, this gimmick they've added to it, make it more valuable, might make the ship more interesting. As it is right now, though, unless you really want to play that playstyle, I would give it a pretty big pass. Anyway, that was all for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it.